Hey guys, so Adam here again, and coming to you at the end of day one of the Society for Neuroscience conference here in New Orleans. So the conference kicked off this morning at 11 a.m. with a talk by Chuck Close, the famed portrait artist. And just to remind you of who Chuck Close is, I'm sure you've seen this image before, but right here I'm putting up on screen just the iconic self-portrait image, or one of many iconic self-portrait images that Chuck Close has painted over the years. And personally, I was actually shocked when he put this up on screen and said that it was a painting, because I've seen this image before, but I had just assumed that this image was actually a photograph. I had no idea that he had painted this, and that just takes it to a whole new level when you realize that this is a 9-foot tall canvas that he spent hours upon hours upon hours just meticulously changing and shifting and working this over until it was as perfect as it is here. And so you might be wondering why a portrait artist is an appropriate speaker at a neuroscience convention. And so another interesting fact about Chuck Close is that he actually has face blindness, or prosopagnosia. And so he manages to paint these incredible portraits, but yet he cannot recognize faces. And so when asked why it is that he's motivated to do this, he said, "I wanted to know the people that I loved, wanted to be able to remember them." And so these paintings are his way of committing to memory the faces that he's painting. So he always paints friends, and he always paints people that he loves and people that he knows. And it's interesting because in order to do this, he can't simply sit down and look at somebody and paint them, because he can't recognize them. He can't transfer what he's seeing in the face into an actual image. He needs to work from a photograph. And here I'm putting up an image of a gridded off photograph. And so what he'll do is he'll take these gridded off photographs and just work one block at a time, one square at a time, across the image, just bit by bit. And in that way, he can kind of translate the image that he has in the photograph into an image on the canvas. And I just thought that that was really, really interesting. And you might say, well, that's not art. You know, that's not really. He's not really doing anything. He's copying. But he made the comment that inspiration is for amateurs, and the real artists just work hard. And I think that that applies in a lot of areas. He said continually throughout the talk that he doesn't feel as if he's someone who has any special abilities. It's more that he's someone who works really hard and really tried to excel in the one area that he could excel in, because not only does he have prosopagnosia, but he also has dyslexia and was never really one for math or science or anything like that. And he wasn't very good at reading or writing or any of this. And so working with his hands and being able to paint pictures was really his means of showing his intelligence and his means of excelling. And so, in order to do this, he not only worked from grids, but in a lot of his early work, and I'm putting up a picture here, he would just work with dots, just kind of what did he call it? He called these the stupidest, dumbest marks that he could possibly put up. He just worked with these single dots and tried to put together an image that way with the smallest number of dots possible. He stated that 164 dots is the minimum that you need to make a person. And so working from these small incremental steps, he's eventually moved on to doing images like this one, where each individual block within the overall portrait is actually this incredibly complex structure in and of itself. And so I just think that this stuff is amazing. And in a panel discussion after Chuck Close's talk, Eric Kandel, the famed neuroscientist, mentioned that it's interesting to think that in a way Chuck Close's limitations are really the things that made him the artist that he is. And so he thinks that he made the comment that it would be interesting to examine to what extent movements in art have come about because of brain damage and misfunction in the artists that were involved. He also noted that damage to the left hemisphere can actually free up the right. So there are these theories that apparently the right hemisphere is in some ways inhibited by the left hemisphere. And of course, everyone's kind of familiar with the general paradigm that the left hemisphere is kind of your analytic and mathematical and language processing area, and the right hemisphere is more artistic and imagery focused. And so I just thought that that was a very interesting point, and Chuck Close spoke to that a little bit by saying those of us who went into art needed to find another venue for our intelligence. And I think that really summed it up, and it was a great talk. And so if you're not familiar at all with Chuck Close's work, I think you would do yourself a great service by just going online, just Googling Chuck Close, checking out some of his work. It's just phenomenal stuff. Okay, so that was it for the Chuck Close talk. Great talk. After the Chuck Close talk, I went to a Nano Symposium about long-term memory, and I won't burden you with everything that happened there, but I will tell you about one particularly interesting study from Ben-Yakov and Dudai at the Weizmann Institute of Science. And so the title of this talk was Memory Predictive Hippocampal Activity at the Offset of Episodic Units. Okay, very confusing title. But the basic question that these people were trying to ask was, how are experiences transformed into episodic memories? So that is, you have an experience, you're in the world and you're experiencing something, and how do you take that and kind of crystallize it into an episodic memory that's going to last and persist in time? And so you can think that an episodic memory has kind of multiple elements. Thing 1 happens, thing 2 happens, thing 3 happens. But when you combine them into an episodic memory, they're one thing. They're combined into a single episode. And so when does this combination happen? Do you have online registration or offline registration? And so online registration would basically mean that each element that you encounter gets encoded and registered into memory as you go. That's online registration. So if I'm telling you about getting lunch, then online registration would be that when I walk up to the counter to make my order, I am registering that into memory, and then as I wait for my order to be filled, I'm registering that into memory, and then as I grab my food and sit down at the table, I'm registering that into memory, all going into memory one bit at a time. Offline registration, on the other hand, would suggest that I order my food, I wait for my food, I grab my food, and I sit down. And as I go through all of those things, the episode isn't being integrated. Instead, what's happening is that the episode is kind of being stored in this buffer space, and then it's only after the episode is over that I go ahead and I store it into long-term memory. And so the brain structure that's going to be responsible for this and that we're going to be looking at is the hippocampus. And so I'm putting a picture up of that on screen, a very grainy picture. Sorry about that. Couldn't find a better picture here on fairly short notice. But the hippocampus is this small structure that you can see right here, and it's kind of nestled down. So if you were to, it's kind of behind your nose almost, right between your ears, and right in the middle of your brain. So if you were to look at your brain from underneath, it would be kind of right in underneath there. And so the hippocampus is this small area of the brain that's thought to be known to be responsible for the formation of new declarative memories. And so the question here, we're looking at offline versus online registration. So what they did in this, so I'm putting up on screen now an extremely well-drawn figure of the basic paradigm that these authors used. And again, those authors were Ben-Yakov and Dudai. And so basically what they did was they would have 6 images, and all 6 of these images would relate to a single episode. You could imagine, if we're talking about the example of going and getting lunch, image 1 is walking into the diner, image 2 is making the order, and then image 3 is standing at the counter waiting for the food to come out, image 4 is grabbing it, and then image 5 and 6 are images of eating the food and maybe leaving. And so that would be kind of the time course of the episode. So all 6 images relate to each other. And what they did was they had images 1 and 2 put together, and then there was a pause. Images 3 and 4 were kind of put together, and then there was a pause. And then images 5 and 6 were put together. And so between each pause, the participants were told either try and memorize what has been shown to you so far, that pair of images. Try and memorize that pair of images as a unit by itself, or try and wait and memorize the entire episode all together. And so what they did was they had participants in the MRI scanner, and so they're registering bold blood oxygen level dependent response. And so what they're looking for is to see blood oxygen level dependent response is kind of a measure of brain activity. And so they're looking in the hippocampus for brain activity and trying to see, does the brain activity in the hippocampus, which we know is associated with storing of new memories, does that brain activity seem to peak with each pair, as would be predicted by online registration, shown in the top part of the figure that I'm putting on screen now? Or does the bold response, which is a measure of neural activity again, or a measure of metabolic activity that is thought to be related to neural activity, but we can use it as kind of a proxy for neural activity here. So, or does that bold response peak after all three pairs have been shown, suggesting that the hippocampus isn't really coming in on the action to encode the memory until after the episode is complete? And so what they found was that the offline registration hypothesis seemed to be the correct one, and that the hippocampus was actually responding to these paired events after all three pairs had been shown. So I thought that was a really interesting study. And so, I just thought that was a pretty cool finding that I would share with you guys, that seems like in general, there are more details to be worked out, but seems like the hippocampus encodes everything from this kind of buffer space where you store the episode as it happens, and then the hippocampus takes that buffer space memory, as it were, that kind of temporary storage memory, and transfers it into long-term memory. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting study and a fairly elegant study, and I just wanted to share that with you guys. And so I think that's going to be it for today, but check back tomorrow for more neuroscience. All right, thanks guys.